and welcome to Gar Borras' Time Machine. Gar, this is episode 39, and I'm going to give you a hint on what we're doing today. Moving on up, Soothie. Of course, I'm talking about the Jeffersons. And I got to tell you, that's a fun little interesting fact. I don't know if you're aware of this, but the theme song was performed by Janet Dubois, who was actress who played Willona Woods, the nosy neighbor on Good Times. So it's kind of interesting that she had a role in the Jeffersons.
I always used to get both of those shows kind of mixed up. I mean,
yeah.
I mean, they were very, very similar. Just doing the research, about the history of the show.
Yeah.
It was a very groundbreaking show.
In many ways, yes.
A lot of firsts, happened on that show, and which had a lot to do with why the show was so successful. It's so weird because, I found out that, I all these years, I was never aware of this. Mm-hmm. But all these years, there was a 21-year difference between...
Yes.
between George and Wheezy.
Yeah.
And she had the, serious reservations about, him playing her husband, being that he was 21 years younger.
You know what's funny is by watching that show and prepping for the show today, I was watching some old episodes that I taped, because I knew we were going to be doing this today. And, knowing this after I learned it too, and doing our research, watching it, you never known that there was 21 years difference between them when they were on the show together. I mean, I think that says a lot about what great actors they are, because they look like they were similar in age. And that kind of is another thing, talking about Good Times too. The actor that played on Good Times, the father, James Evans Sr., John Amos, he was only
I loved him. He's a great actor.
He was only 5 years older than the one that played JJ, his son. So the two that are playing father and son on that show are only like 5 years apart. Can you believe that?
Well, but then there's a similar one with, with this show too.
Yeah.
Because Sherman Hensley is in real life
a lot
only
older.
11 years older than the guy that plays his son.
Yeah.
Only 11 years older than him, and the guy plays his son.
Yeah.
It's just so weird because, Sherman Hensley kind of had this,
swagger.
He looked older than he was.
Maybe it's a mustache. I don't know.
Who knows?
Yeah.
But he really could play characters that were much older than he really was.
Oh, sure.
It was just kind of trippy how, you take those three, which are the main characters,
yeah.
and age-wise, on paper, it doesn't work.
And what's funny is, like you just pointed out,
in real life, it was a TV match in heaven.
Yeah, and what's interesting,
for all three of those.
What's interesting is the one that played the father and son are closer in age than the one that played the mother and father. But wow,
Yes. It's so weird how like on paper it just doesn't look good. It looks wrong, but. That's just that magic that nobody. That's the thing about things becoming successful. You have some people that are more successful than others at being able to recognize and utilize and achieve. But most people don't.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And then we got to also start by explaining that the Jeffersons was actually a spin-off of All in the Family. Before they ever had their own series, they of course appeared on All in the Family. And I'm sure, like myself and a lot of people, Gar, that's where you first kind of were introduced to the Jeffersons. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Well, when I was watching All in the Family, I just never remembered the appearances.
Wow.
By their son and Wheezy.
Yeah.
But but my, recollections, because I mean, when he hit the screen with him and Archie Bunker, when he was just doing those guest appearances on All in the Family, it was sparks. Sparks were flying, and it just made for really good TV. You know what I mean? And those, for me, it's when George made the appearances on All in the Family that really had a huge impact and showed why Norman Lear, was willing to wait 2 years for Sherman Hemsley to finish up his obligations on Broadway.
Sure.
To be able to start doing his appearances on All in the Family, with the idea of launching the Jeffersons. Yeah. You see what I mean?
Sure. And here's what's interesting that I always kind of wondered about, that I did not know until we decided to do the Jeffersons episode we're doing today, is I always wondered, because when they first made the appearance, I'm talking about the Jeffersons on All in the Family, like the very first time the Jeffersons ever appear, it's Lionel and Louise, and I could not understand, okay, because the husband and the father, who of course is George Jefferson, doesn't get introduced for quite a number of episodes, and in the meantime they had this other character, Henry Jefferson, that is introduced as George's younger brother, Henry Jefferson, and I'm kind of wondering, why do they have this other character instead of just showing the father? And it's for the very reason you said. He was on a Broadway musical, and Norman Lear's like, well, we want to launch these characters, and we're willing to wait for him, and we'll handle it this way. Now, if you go back, that's what's interesting. When they appear on All in the Family first, it's almost as if Louise and the son Lionel are kind of the head of the family, or the stars, if you will. And it wasn't until like 8 episodes into it that George is introduced, and that's the final episode that they have the character Henry Jefferson, and that's the only episode those two actors ever appeared in.
Well, I just remember it was there was just no denying that the chemistry between him and Archie, Bunker, were just TV magic. You know what I mean?
Oh, sure.
It was just.
And I got to ask,
great writing too.
Oh, sure.
Because the scenes were full of laughter and great chuckles. You know what I mean? Yeah. But it was kind of edgy, because now we look back and
doesn't seem so edgy
so much, where all of these things have become like the norm. Back in the mid-1970s, when this show launched, those things were not the norm. Yeah. An interracial relationship on TV had never been done. An interracial kiss had never been done on TV. Sure. So many firsts, and it's so weird, because younger people that would watch it now, because it's just become the norm. You just
every day.
And it's like no big deal. But back in 1975, it was a huge deal. The guy that played the white husband, to the black woman, her Roxy Roker.
Yeah, actually, and she was Lenny Kravitz's.
He received death threats.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
For portraying a white man in a interracial, relationship. Think about that.
Yeah.
You're an actor.
And
you're playing a part.
Yeah.
You're doing your job. That's what your job is. And you don't write the scripts. You don't have any control over any of that. But because you are a white man in 1975 in a relationship with a black woman, that means that you deserve a death threat. Think about that.
And here, we should take that, to the next extreme, which is this. I was also reading that, like you said, that was very controversial at the time, having an interracial kiss between these two actors on a TV screen. And today, if this was to happen, somebody was to receive death threats like that, immediately these people would be arrested for hate crimes. They would be deemed racist. But also back in 1975, this was so controversial that the head of that everybody at the CBS network was trying to, shut this. Oh no, we can't have this. We can't have this in the script. We got to change this. But it was actually Fred Silverman, who was the head of programming at the time, who he really pushed for it. He said, "No, we're going to go ahead with this."
And those are the groundbreaking things that had a lot to do with the show's success, because it was mirroring what was really happening at that time back in 1975. That is the year that the show was launched.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. It's so weird because, I was in my early 20s. Late teens, early 20s at the time.
Yeah.
And, it was really, the show was really mirroring what was actually happening at that time.
Yeah.
Where nowadays, like I was saying, earlier, nowadays, a lot of these issues that were major issues on the show are all the norm, and we've gotten past those issues. Yeah. Well, I'd like to think we've got past those issues.
They were the norm back then. They were,
question that nowadays.
Yeah, they were much more hidden. Again, getting back to how they were launched on All in the Family, did you ever see any of the episodes of All in the Family where Archie would kind of interact with the son Lionel, and they had this kind of unique relationship where the son Lionel is kind of clowning on Archie, and Archie doesn't know because Archie's supposed to be a bigot, he's supposed to be so racist, and he'd say these little things to his son Lionel like, "Oh, hey Lionel, your people, they really like fried chicken, huh?" And he goes, "Yeah, we eat watermelon too, Archie, and it's really, really good, and he'd play along with these little stereotypes people had, and of course Lionel, the way Archie knew Lionel was because he was friends with his son-in-law, his dummy son-in-law, Mike Stivic, and his daughter, and that's how they kind of got introduced. Now, if you look at the characters of George and Archie, they're also they're kind of have a lot and similar. I mean, like they're racist, but on opposing sides, if you know what I mean. Yeah. And
which made for the spark.
Yeah. That's why there was that friction.
Fuel for the comedy.
Yeah.
Which when you really look at it, that was, back in 1975, that was fresh comedy.
Oh, sure.
You know what I mean? It wasn't something that was rehashed over many, many years that reached the point where, 1975, that style of comedy was brand new.
Oh, yeah.
And it's really hard for people that, that are from later generations that was never really part of it. And the only way they really see it is maybe TV Land on TV.
Oh, yeah.
Or any of those retro TV stations that show older programs. That's the only way that they're really going to be exposed to it. But when they watch it, there's like, what's the big deal about this issue? What's the big deal about that issue?
I mean,
but they're looking at it out of context because now those things aren't the issue that they used to be back in 1975.
Oh, sure. And here's the thing with that too. I remember when like All in the Family premiered. That was a very controversial show too for its time, and even before the Jeffersons ever appeared. I mean, there were a few episodes when the show first premiered. They had a warning like before the show. Okay, we want to warn the audience that some of the views in this programming may be controversial. But after the show started being successful, they didn't have to show the warnings anymore. But let's now get into the kind of the history of how the show was really kind of developed. Now, The Jeffersons was a TV series, of course, premiered on January 18th, 1975, and it ran till July 2nd, 1985 on CBS, aired for 11 seasons for a total of 253 episodes. Now, here's what's interesting that I found out. Norman Lear, a producer of All in the Family, like you said, he created the role of George Jefferson, but Sherman Hemsley was appearing on Broadway, so they waited for him. Now, this is what is really interesting. The idea for the Jefferson spinoff came when 3 members of the Black Panthers, who claimed to be a fan of Lear's TV productions, visited Lear at his CBS office, who voiced to Lear that they had concerns over the way black people were portrayed on television, including his show, Good Times, which was a spin-off of Maud Lear, was told the concern was that every time a black man was shown on TV, he was dirt poor, couldn't afford anything, and was always seen wearing dirty clothes. Now think about that. I mean,
stereotypes. That was the stereotype back then.
Yeah. But I mean, the fact that
people nowadays that never experienced that don't know anything about that. But that was a real thing back then.
And see, that's the thing is, up until the Jeffersons, I mean, like Good Times is also Norman Lear spin-off of Maude, as we said. And the thing with that is that's kind of a polar opposite of the Jeffersons. What people like about the Jeffersons is, okay, this is the first time we're getting to see a black family, but they're rich. They're living in the good neighborhood. They're living the good life. Whereas some people might say, and I think I've heard Norman Lear talk about this, well, with Good Times, it was kind of what people thought of the typical black family at the time. You know, they were living in the ghetto. They were having a tough time in life, but they stuck together. That was kind of the storyline of Good Times. Whereas the Jefferson is like the complete polar opposite.
Well, and what they were saying about the stereotypes too. Look at what's his name, Red Fox's character.
Sure.
On that show, it's the epitome of exactly what was being, voiced. That concern that was being voiced is every time you saw a black character on TV, he was dirty clothes, and he was dirt poor. And that was, perpetuating that stereotype. And when you perpetuate that stereotype, that element of society can never dig themselves out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If that's, it's just, stacking the deck against them by always portraying them that way. And then, when black people watch the show, then they look at, oh, that's my future. That's the way my future is going to be. That's where I'm going. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It has everything to do with your own perception of yourself.
Sure.
And there was a distinct thing going on back in those days to always perpetuate that, to keep that going.
Yeah.
And the black, and back in 1975, there was a big pushback, by the black community. They were sick and tired of being, portrayed that way, and it's not the representation of their race. It's a stereotype.
Yeah.
That's exactly what they were voicing.
And here's what's funny about that, Gar. So while we have Good Times and the Jeffersons, as I said, which are two polar opposites. After the Jeffersons eventually, ends, we don't have another black kind of upscale TV family until maybe, Dr. Huxtable on the Cosby Show. So that's kind of interesting. Even though the Jeffersons kind of done this. After that went off air, it was maybe a couple of years later till we even get to Dr. Huxtable. But getting back to the Jeffersons, I just found it was very interesting that it took, 3 Black Panthers visiting the office of Norman Lear to kind of even get him to kind of think about that. And after they showed up and they had their little discussion with him, Norman Lear then met with his associate producer, Al Burden, and development on the Jeffersons spinoff series began at that time.
Well, and Sherman Hemsley, was like the perfect character.
Yeah.
To pull that whole thing off. And you just really never see producers that are willing to wait 2 years, for a particular actor to
just get somebody else.
Available.
Yeah.
But now when everything's said and done, and it's at the end of the day, and you can look back and everything, you can definitely see the genius of why Norman Lear was willing to wait so long long for him to become available to play that character. The second he hit the screen and started portraying that character, it was sparks.
And what's interesting about that is, like I said, when the Jeffersons were launched on All in the Family, it seemed like Louise, the character of Louise Jefferson, was kind of a star. It seemed like she was going to get top billing. In fact, when the Jefferson series was launched, Isabel Sanford, I guess because she had done it longer than Sherman Hemsley, she had top billing at first, but then Sherman Hemsley, like on the Jeffersons, had this huge like breakout role, like you're saying, and be kind of like the way people reacted to Jimmy Walker on Good Times.
You got that right.
And so
absolutely.
So then all of a sudden, when people think, okay, yeah, Sherman Hemsley, he was the main star. That wasn't the case when the Jeffersons first launched. But like you're saying, because he had this breakout role, he was just so great at that role. People responded to Sherman Hemsley.
Well, and it's so funny, to look back, even at that, aspect, because when he was before all of this and had aspirations, he worked in the post office for like many years.
Wow! Wow!
And so he kept that job while he was acting. For all of these different parts and stuff like that, he was still working as a mailman in Philadelphia and New York. So when he moved to New York to get closer to be able to pursue his acting career, he was able to just transfer to a different post office in New York and still continue working and doing that whole thing. And then you look at him, and then Florence, the
Sassy maid,
Florence on there. She also worked for I think it was United Airlines.
Yes, I heard that. Yeah.
And she kept her job. She had worked for American Airlines for like 11 years.
Amazing.
And, it's just so trippy, to think that, back in those days, the fall back on was like in full swing. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And again, as we've already kind of discussed this, but another key element of a show, it says, part of the plot of a new Jefferson series was that son Lionel Jefferson was engaged to Jenny, the daughter to biracial parents Tom and Helen Willis. This was a first for a TV sitcom in the 1970s. So again, it's kind of setting it up for, okay, this is going to bring for, I don't want to say comedy, but, and also the friction, because anytime like the Willises would walk into a room, George would always have something smart aleck to say or make some racial comment. Like one thing I was reading that throughout the series, George Jefferson is constantly referring to the Willises as a zebra couple because she's black and he's white. And what's interesting is I was reading that Sherman Hemsley really had a problem kind of playing the role of George Jefferson, believe it or not, because he was a total opposite of George, where he was like, well, why are you having me call him a zebra if he's supposed to be my son's father-in-law and we're friends? Why would I call him a racial slur?
Well, it was the edge to his character.
Yeah, and that's what's amazing. You find out this stuff, and of course we know George Jefferson is just a character, but he was so great at portraying that character that I think that's what made him so well at portraying his character. In fact, I was reading, this is interesting, he had such a problem with saying some of these, lines like zebra, and when they have him say racial stuff, that he started mumbling some of the lines. I remember saying zebra or zebra, and it wasn't like could be understood what he was saying. People, and then the people behind the scenes, when they're filming an episode, they would get very frustrated because time is money, and they'd have to do a lot of reshoots. So after a few times of doing that, the writers and producers just got fed up, and they just took it out of the script. So, but again, that's showing you the power an actor could have.
Well, the whole thing is I think the bottom line was for the writers let's put it this way.
Yeah.
A lot of people look at Married with Children as a groundbreaking, edgy comedy because previous to Married with Children, TV sitcoms weren't like that.
Yeah.
The characters had a lot of rough edges, and there was subject lines with rough edges, and it was a very edgy comedy. But in reality, the edgy comedy really started happening with All in the Family, and then one step later, the Jeffersons.
Yeah, and then
that was edgy comedy for that time period.
Yes, and for the 80s, Married with Children was kind of a modern day All in the Family, just a little more edgier, a little more dirtier, nastier. I mean, you could at least say, like, with Archie and Edith, they're a loving kind of older couple. They got their little moments, but deep down they love one. Where with, like, Peg and Al, kind of the same thing, but, Al kind of leads you to wonder, does he really love his wife?
They took that and they completely messed it up.
And then Roseanne, when Roseanne comes on the TV landscape, I mean, it's kind of a continuation of Married with Children. But what many people loved about Roseanne was it was so like everyday people. Everybody watching could kind of, I've done that. I've seen it. And that's kind of thing too with the Jeffersons, where even though it's a rich kind of upscale family, like we were talking about, it didn't really matter because these people were relatable. And even George saying his racial slurs, I mean, if we want to admit it or not, at the time in the 70s, like you're saying, that's kind of an accurate portrayal because we don't talk that way, just because we don't interact with people that talk. There's people in the world. The point is, there's people that do, and they were kind of showing that,
Yeah. Another thing that I always knew, but I really didn't know that much about it.
Yeah.
Was that Linda? The Roxy Roker.
Lenny Kravitz's mom. Yeah.
Is Lenny Kravitz's mom.
Yeah, I was
in real life.
Yeah.
And that's so trippy because she was portraying a black woman with a white husband on the show.
You read the same thing I did, yes? Yeah.
That was actually, she was a black woman with a white husband.
Yeah.
And she used to bring Lenny to the set a lot because she wanted to be able to have a close relationship with her son. She didn't want to be gone at work and then hiring, nannies, to do all that. She wanted to have that close relationship with her son. So her son was on set as a young boy a lot.
Yeah, that's where he was even famous. Yeah.
And another thing that just crossed my mind, this is, she got that name like so long ago that, it has nothing to do with what I visualized.
Yeah.
But her name, Roxy
Roker,
would be the perfect name for somebody in a glam band.
Yeah.
Instead of Roxy, it's Roxy Rocker.
There you go. Yeah.
That would be the perfect stage name for somebody that was in a glam band.
Yeah. And just talk a little more about Roxy Roker. As you point out, actress. This is another interesting thing. Actress Roxy Roker, who was cast as Jenny's black mother, was asked during her casting interview if she would mind having an on-screen husband who was played by a white actor. I mean, just imagine a black woman comes in to interview for a part, goes to casting call, and they ask you, would you have any problem if your on-screen husband was portrayed by a white man? I mean, that's just something they would not ask these days because they know if they dared ask, the person would probably leave in an uproar. They probably go on a PR tour telling people, "Oh, I can't believe the questions they asked me during this interview. These are racist people." But that's what they asked, and so her response was to pull out a photograph of her real life husband, who, as you pointed out, was a white man. I mean, you could not be more perfect for a role. I mean, talk about really kind of portraying your real life here, you know?
Yeah. You know, I thought that was just like, it really, kind of almost, Slash, had a famous mom that worked in the entertainment industry, and also he was, as a young boy, he was, exposed to a lot of highly successful Hollywood people as a young child.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of similarities to how Lenny Kravitz grew up, and you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. It says, and let's talk about some of the characters. Okay, you mentioned Florence, kind of the sassy maid, and what's interesting, we got to keep in mind the Jeffersons. Okay, they were at one time supposedly very poor. George works his way up to the point where he's able to eventually open 7 cleaning stores. That's how he made his money. And he gets to the point where, we first come to know these people as the neighbors of Archie and Edith Bunker, which at the time they're living in this Queens, New York neighborhood. And then once they get to the point where they're doing really good, they don't need to stay in that neighborhood. This is when the Jeffersons kind of spinoff happens. They move it to this luxurious high-rise building, and right away, George and son Lionel, they're just basking in all the new fortune, the money. They're just loving the new lifestyle. Louise, on the other hand, is having a much harder time. It gets to one point where George does want to hire a maid because he's at this new point in life. He doesn't want his wife to have to work so hard. But when Florence is kind of introduced and they hire the maid Florence, Louise like, oh, George, I used to be a maid. I just can't see having a maid. No, Weezy, you work so hard, and let me do this for you. And so they even show stuff like that. How people that were one time poor, the wife is having a hard time dealing with her, newfound fortune.
Yeah. Well, and Florence, what a great character. I mean, she just had such sharp
sass.
lines.
Yeah.
And the way that she went back and forth with, George, Sherman Hemsley's character, it was just, TV gold.
Then there's Ralph the doorman, always willing to do anything to make a buck, always has his hand out.
Always got his hand out.
For a tip. Whenever George wanted a favor, he'd call Ralph the doorman. Hey, Ralph, you ready to make a quick $50-100? Oh, sure, Mr. Jefferson, you're my favorite tenant. I'll be right there. Yeah,
man. It was a very, very it was so, there were other shows and everything, but what made this show so much more popular than any of the others, not to take anything away from any of the others that were going on at the in the 1970s, but it's just when you look at the amount of success that the Jeffersons had, it towers over the other black comedies that were going on at the same time. And part of that that the reason for that success was the writing. Norman Lear, you don't have that kind of continuous success of show after show after show after show, because Norman Lear was, he was at the top of his game back in mid 1970s. He was one of those major power players in Hollywood TV at that time.
Norman Lear still
and he the main reason why he had that much success, the writers.
Oh, sure. And you've talked about that in many of our episodes. And, I just tip my hat to Norman Lear. I got to give it to the man. He's still alive and kicking. He recently turned 101 years old. So I think he's at a place in life where he can kind of look back on all these great shows he created. And we got to thank him for that. But, but Jeffersons was groundbreaking for so many reasons. We brought up earlier in today's episode the fact that, the actors that played Tom and Helen Willis, they experienced. They were like the first interracial couple to have a kiss on screen. But if we're honest, let's go all the way back to the 1960s, where it was groundbreaking back then. The fact that on the cast of Star Trek, they cast actress Michelle Williams, who played Lieutenant O'Hara, and there was an episode where Captain Kirk and her kiss, and I think that was the first time ever on TV that took place. But I think what made this a little different than that was, obviously 1975 is, years later, and this is like an actual couple, a married couple on TV. And people, that's why people kind of did respond to it the way they did at the time. You have half the public didn't really think much of it, and you had other people who were kind of up in arms. Oh my God, they got a white man kissing a black woman, and that's why even on the Jeffersons, that was groundbreaking, because that's the first time you had a married couple doing that on TV.
Well, and it's hard for people to get their minds wrapped around it, because none of those things are issues now.
Oh, sure.
You see, people kissing
all the time,
interracial kissing, like all the time now.
Yeah.
And it's just, we're so past all of that. But back in 1975, that was not the case. It was a very, very different time, and there were elements of our society that were very, very upset about that.
Yeah.
It's hard for people to understand that segregation was still going on back in 1975. Did you know that?
I wasn't aware of it until, years later.
Segregation. Yeah. 1975 is not that long ago.
Yeah. It's in our lifetime.
And schools were still segregated back in 1975. There were white schools and there were black schools. Yeah. And it was back in that time, that's when those laws were changing and they were ending segregation, and there was massive turmoil going on about this at that time.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't know that. They look back at the 70s and we're so past that now. But no, back in 1975, things that we take for granted now were not things that you could take for granted back in 1975.
Oh, yeah. And again, I love episodes too, because again, many people watch the Jeffersons often think of George as, a bigot or racist, against interracial couples, or even, against white people mainly. But I love the episodes, for example, where they show you deep down George, very much like Archie Bunker, really is a good guy. For example, while we're supposed to believe George is this awful bigot against white people, I remember one episode they show where they accidentally not knowingly walk into a KKK meeting, and what it is because Tom Willis, he talks to this guy. He has no idea it's a KK meeting, and he's like, "Oh yeah, we want to, the tenants are protesting against the way they're treating this and that in the building," and that's what he thinks he's walking into. Then they come to find out that it's a KK meeting, and then he brings George, of course, along with him, and you can imagine when they realize, "Oh, you dummy! What did you bring me to?" and this and that. Well, one of the KKK leaders has like a heart attack, and then George comes to the rescue, of course, and he gives him CPR and saves him. And the KKK leader's son is even he thanks George, "Hey, thanks for saving my dad." And then by the end of the episode, the KK leader tells George, I wish you would have let me die." So again, it's kind of showing, when somebody's life is in danger, black or white, George Jefferson came to the rescue, and I liked when they would do episodes like that.
Well, then again, just these are the storylines that were going on back in 1975.
Yeah.
And which are not normal storylines for TV.
Yeah.
You see what I mean?
Oh, sure.
And which had everything to do with why the show was so successful. I keep circling back to all of that, but that it's a whole thing, a sequence of events that had everything to do with why the show was successful. And what's so trippy about those sequence of events is you can try to duplicate it. You can try to do,
But you're never going to.
Yes. It's like a one-time thing where all of a sudden the planets are aligned and everything worked out perfectly. But that's not something that you can recreate. It's a magical thing that has everything to do. And like I've always said, is very few people have their thumb on
the pulse.
What makes, or on the pulse of what makes something successful.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Nobody really has that recipe that you can, you have some people that are more successful than others.
Yeah. But
there really is no true recipe where if you do this, X, Y, and blah, blah, do, you're going to have success. No.
Yeah, and what's interesting, the way that Jeffersons kind of came to a halting end, it ran like till 1985, as I said. The Jeffersons was the first African-American television show since Sanford and Son to peak in the top 5. In the show's 8th season, the show hit number 3. So again, when they were just 8 seasons into the 11 seasons, they were still number 3. So that's quite a successful thing now. But Jeffersons was canceled, it said, in its 11th season. There was no there's no farewell episode. It was just canceled when the show's ratings began to slip. In fact, I've seen some interviews with the actors where they just say, we just found out like everybody else in the paper. We weren't even notified the show was going to be canceled. I mean, you can imagine. So again, that's kind of it's very sad because it would have been cool if they would have had like a lot of shows a farewell show,
Well, they felt, the actors and actresses felt disrespected, by the way that they wound up doing that, and in all reality, it was disrespectful.
Yeah.
There's no denying it. It was very disrespectful, how the network did that. I was looking at, other things besides, the show, what was, going on. The price of gas was about 45 cents a gallon back then.
Wow, yeah. Can you believe that?
Think about that. About 45 cents a gallon back in those days.
Yeah. Look in California.
A new house was about $24,000.
Oh, wow.
What you would buy a car for now.
Yeah. Just think about that.
Sold for what you can buy a car for now.
Yeah. And like we said, the Jeffersons aired for 11 seasons, Gar. And just to kind of give people an idea of where the Jeffersons' place in pop culture history is, I posted on our Facebook page when I announced that we were doing this today an old Denny's TV commercial starring Sherman Hemsley and Isabel Sanford as their characters George and Wheezy Jefferson. They're sitting down and she's talking, "Oh, George, what are you talking about?" And again, when you start seeing these old TV characters reprise their famous TV roles and TV commercials, that tells you that they've made their mark in the world.
Well, that was, because they changed those time slots so much, 15 times.
Wow.
In the 10 years that show was in existence, they changed their time slot 15 times.
Yeah.
That's more than I've ever heard of any show. And yet, every single time they changed the time slot, the audience followed.
Yeah, that's true. And again,
most shows, when you change a time slot, it can be the death blow to that TV show.
Yeah.
But that is an indicator, an undeniable indicator of how successful and how loyal the fans were to that show back in those days.
Oh, sure. And again, to wrap this up, Gar, for today, just to kind of give people an idea of what was going on in the world back in 1975 when the Jeffersons started. Of course, Gerald Ford was president then. Now this is interesting. October 11th, 1975, NBC debuted the new comedy sketch show Saturday Night Live. The show's premiere is hosted by comedian George Carlin. May he rest in peace. Also, Andy Kaufman was the guest. So again, that's something I think we've talked about doing a future episode on. And Saturday Night Live is one of the few shows that has lasted so long, but it is still on the air all these years later. And so there's something to be said for that. I think I'm much more of a fan of the classic era, but there's they've definitely made their place in pop culture history. And then to kind of show you kind of the contrast from 1975 to what the world was in 1985 when the Jeffersons came to an end. By that point, Ronald Reagan is now president. He's been just reelected president of the United States for the second time. 1985, serial killer Richard Ramirez, known as Night Stalker, starts his killing spree throughout Los Angeles. And then March 31st, 1985, the first ever WrestleMania event takes place at Madison Square Garden in New York for the very first time for the then WWF, which is now the WWE. Now, I was often, I wanted to get your thoughts, Gar, on doing a future episode like on WrestleMania and that, because I'm not a huge fan, but I was a fan of that back in the day. Just a lot of those Mania wrestlers, to me, they have like rock star status. Were you ever much of a fan of that?
No, never watched a single episode in my entire life of any wrestling at all. But here's my thing.
Yeah.
When I was in high school, I used to wrestle.
Okay, wow.
And I was on the wrestling team. It was the hardest sport I ever tried to do.
Yeah.
Because basically, what you're doing when you're wrestling is every muscle in your body strength versus every muscle in your opponent's body's strength. Yeah. One person's strength against another person's strength.
Yeah.
And so every single muscle in your body is tensed up. So when you finally reach the end of that match, where you're wrestling with that other person and every single muscle in your body is tensed up and it's your body strength against theirs, by the end of the match, you are so tired, you can't even lift your arms. All you can do is just let your arms dangle on your sides.
Wow.
That is how tired your whole body is at the end of the match. It's like you can barely stand up because you used all of your energy against that other opponent, and because I did that for all of those years in high school and everything, and I became very, very good at it. I could never get my mind wrapped around WrestleMania because it was staged.
Oh, okay.
And because it was staged, I just could never buy into it.
I got you.
Mentally.
Yeah.
I could never mentally buy into it. But that's my own reasons. It's not like I turned my nose up to it. That's not right.
No, I think, I used to have that. Yeah.
It's just, when you did that and everything, and what I was doing wasn't staged. It was real.
Yeah.
And, and when you compare that to something that's staged, I just couldn't get my mind wrapped around it.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I had that attitude at one point, and like I said, I don't watch a ton of wrestling, but I guess I have an appreciation for what it has become in the sense that kind of like what you're saying, but at the same time, it's amazing when you realize that WrestleMania was kind of just starting, in the late 70s, early 80s, and it's still around all these years later, and they've been able to, some of those guys have been able to make a career out of wrestling. That's just pretty
huge careers.
Yeah.
Huge careers. And what I'm saying, I'm not taking anything away from
No.
any of them.
Yeah.
They have all the rights to their success.
Sure.
The people that are the fans have chosen to be those fans.
Yeah,
they
sure.
are loyal.
Sure.
I mean, they are seriously loyal fans to wrestling. It's just, for me, my background, it just, the planets didn't become aligned for me to become a fan.
Well, there you go. And Gar Borras, I can't believe an hour has passed again, but we've had a ton of fun doing this. This will go up next Saturday, and we want to let people know when they tune in 2 weeks from now, the next episode, which will, can you believe, episode 40, we will be talking about the Nutty Professor, starring none other than Jerry Lewis. So, again, I'm not talking about Eddie Murphy's version of this. This is the original film from the 1960s, I believe it was. And we're going to be talking all about that. And we got a lot of fun episodes planned for the future. So thanks again, Gar, for doing this. If you could just hold on.
I cannot express how much I am looking forward to this next one.
Oh, me too. In fact, I haven't even watched it yet because I want to watch it the night before we do the show. So I'm so it's fresh in my.
Oh my gosh, that movie is so good.
And then
I mean, even today, there's no way you can watch that movie and not laugh.
Yeah, and again, it's further proof that they don't make movies like they used to. Yeah.
And it is so, it's so amazing to think that, the comedy that Jerry Lewis was creating at that time was a brand new style of comedy, which is why he was so successful.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because, but you look back and but honestly, the Nutty Professor, I've always, my entire life, I've always been a huge fan of Jerry Lewis.
Yeah.
All the way back to the Jerry Lewis and Dean Martin days, and where they paired up and all that. I personally feel that the Nutty Professor was, the quintessential Jerry Lewis, vehicle for comedy. It's one of his. It's like his stairway to heaven.
I got it. Yeah, we're going to get into that. And the thing, Gar, is Jerry Lewis, of course, has since passed, but I think that's part of the reason for doing this, to shine a light on a comedy legend that is no longer with us, so people do not forget about the huge talent that he was. And we're going to get on, because we could do a future episode on the Eddie Murphy version, but I say, hey, first you got to shine a light on what came first,
Yeah, the originator of it.
Yeah. Well, Gar, if you could hold on for just a minute, I want to talk to you.
Chaotic Riffs Magazine.